afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar for the Newtown Task Force. This is our second session. Yesterday we had the in-person session, and today we have our WebEx presentation. So again, thank you all for being here. I have with us from JMT, Jennifer Ray, who will be presenting, as well as our staff of Hannah Weber, Jeff Delmonico, Kristen O'Connor, and apologies, one more JMT staff, Scott Rasmussen. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer for the presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Linda, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to join us here. The format that I'll be going through is doing a presentation that will be about between 20 and 30 minutes, and then we will open up for discussion. So about 12:30 to 1 p.m. we'll open for discussion, time to ask questions, go back to any particular board. We'll repeat the presentation at right around 1 p.m. So for those who might be joining late, it will certainly have that as well. And then we'll do an additional open discussion session after that second presentation. As Linda noted, this is our second overall session, and we really are excited to share the work that the task force has been completing as we're gearing towards the final potential recommendations out of that task force. So I'll just begin with the purpose of the task force. So some of this, for those who have been joining us throughout the entire project process, those who've had the opportunity to attend, to listen and view from the back of the task force meetings, and those who came out to the October meeting, some of this information may be very well known to you, but for those who are joining for the first time, again, welcome. We're always looking for more input, and it's very important to get voices from everybody. So just want to do some background information here. So the task force purpose really came about from HOCO by Design, so a document that had a lot of public engagement. And one of those recommendations, as noted on the screen, is that there should be a task force developed to create that task force to evaluate and make recommendations on how to carry forward Newtown's planned community. So as we look at that, the task force purpose, there were executive orders. As noted, county council members are the individuals who put forward and recommended individuals to serve on the task force. The county executive then put out 2 executive orders. The first one approving 20 individuals for the task force, and the second executive order approving the 21st individual. These individuals represent a large demographic, different villages, different walks of life, different perspectives, so that truly all voices are in that room and we can look at everything from all perspectives. The goal of this task force is, as you see what's bolded on the screen, to make recommendations, evaluate and make recommendations, and everything from zoning code to the development process has been discussed. Now, with these recommendations, it is not to rewrite zoning code. It is basically to say, what do we think, looking at this zoning that is within section 125 of the zoning code, what are our recommendations as a task force that the county should take forward, look at, evaluate further, and then move potentially into zoning code reform, which would then go through a public process as well. The overall project schedule for this, there has been a lot of work done already. We began this effort last May in holding a number of stakeholder interviews where we sat down and had one-on-one conversations with every member of the task force, as well as other individuals throughout the community, to really understand what are the key components of Columbia as it is today that are important and to maintain that. There has been an ongoing visioning or ongoing meetings. Every single dot that you see that is colored in on this schedule has been a task force meeting. So with the exception of May and August, we have been meeting on a monthly basis, and the task force members have put in many, many hours of work into everything that's been completed. We began with a visioning process, a piece set analysis, which I'll get into momentarily to explain that further, and are looking and have gone through and looked at recommendations. And here we are today in April, looking at a public meeting, wanting to put those draft recommendations out, put the technical survey out, receive that feedback so that the task force can finalize the recommendations, put into a report to send back and submit to the county. A little bit more background information for those who may not be familiar. Newtown Zoning District Code is section 125 of the overall Howard County Zoning Code, and it's a classification for Columbia as an unincorporated and planned community. It was created in 1965 and initially was created with 13,690 acres and currently is sitting at over 14,000 acres. Unlike many of the other traditional zoning districts throughout the county, Newtown zoning actually regulates plans at the neighborhood level and regulates that land use mix at the neighborhood level. And I'll come back to that of why that's so important and why that was so innovative at that time. I do just want to share as well with the Columbia, showing this Columbia boundary map. As you can see on here, there's the area that is known as Columbia that is identified with that orange boundary outline. And that serves as a reference because also often we're using Newtown and Columbia interchangeably. But the reality is Newtown is not all of Columbia. There are portions of Columbia that do not exist within the Newtown zoning. And as you can see on this map, those areas that are that much darker gray, that is what is actually Newtown zoning. So while Newtown zoning is within Columbia, not all of Columbia is Newtown zoned. You'll see those areas that are that lighter color that don't have that dark gray. Those are still land within Columbia, not zone Newtown, and carry the other distinctions of the zoning code, such as M2, B1, R20, etc. Another way to look at Newtown Columbia boundary map is through, of course, the villages. And this map simply shows the different points of interest and the villages. So I mentioned before, let's talk a little bit about why this was such an innovative idea. There's an individual named James Rouse who developed this back in the 1960s. And it was done at a time where this concept of having a fully integrated from race and religion and socioeconomics was not really what the norm was around the country. And that's what James Rouse did with the concept of Columbia and with Newtown. The idea was to build that complete city, to make sure to respect the land in doing so, which is truly represented by the amount of green space and open space that exists, to provide for the growth of people. And of course, as with everything else in business, is to make a profit. And so it's something that many people, and we've heard over and over again, that people choose to come to Columbia because of the innovation, because of the way it's established, because of the community, because of the green space. All of this process is still looking at how do we retain what was created in the 1960s, established further in the 1970s, recognize that today is 2026, and how do we look, so we're 60 plus years later, how do we make sure that with the way the world has changed around us, that we're still able to take all the things that are special about Columbia and ensure that can succeed for the future as things have changed, materials have changed, populations have changed, population density has changed. And so what this task force, our very first activity in the summer, last summer, was to identify what is the task force vision. This was not to rewrite the vision or master planning statement for Columbia, for Howard County, for any of the individual villages as they have their own plans. This was to identify something that the task force members came together and agreed that this would be the overall vision, that come the end of this process, all draft recommendations will be put back and measured against this, that indeed the draft recommendations were still maintaining what was important about Columbia and being able to ensure that they met that litmus test as we continued many conversations. The next step, as I mentioned earlier, of the PSET analysis is based on the PSET principles, which stands for preserve, strengthen, enhance, and transform. And what that really means is looking at all of the different elements throughout the Newtown zoning code and recognizing, is there something that needs to be preserved? It is working well, it is very important, and we just need to simply maintain what is working well. The second being to strengthen. Strengthen what's already working, but perhaps as time has gone on, there might have been some loopholes found, or just that other things have changed and what already is working just needs to be strengthened in its context. Then enhance. So enhancing what's working, but putting perhaps some additional guide rails on to further enhance what the intention is. And finally, transform. What might have worked in the 1960s and 70s might not be as applicable today, and perhaps it needs to be transformed such that the intent still matches what the world is today. So with these different PSET principles, we went through the various discussion elements and really analyzed all of these different elements. And the key elements for discussion, as you see on your screen, are really the ones when you look over the Newtown zoning district, instead of having to go through section 125.1, point 2, point A, point 8, all of that, these were really put out into major themes. And these themes came forward through the process as the County Department of Planning and Zoning has heard about different concerns. They have come from the task force members. They have also come through prior studies that came before this task force committee. And we're really looking at different elements and different recommendations that would then be incorporated into this effort. From that work, so that's the visioning and the PSET analysis. So from that work, we really got into the heart of drafting recommendations. And what that recommendation development process looked like is that a number of potential recommendations had been identified. They've been identified through the task force PSET discussions. We were writing everything down as they were being discussed. So even if one item came out as a potential recommendation and it might have quickly gotten kind of tossed to the side, we wrote everything down so that we could come back holistically and look at everything together. It came from our October public meeting card. So back in October, we had our first round of public meetings to really talk about the vision, talk about the concerns, talk about what people wanted to see within Columbia. It also came from that online survey that was completed October through November. And ultimately, there were 42 potential recommendations that were identified for discussion once we really looked at everything combined and started aligning recommendations that were similar to each other. From that point, we had the recommendations discussion with the task force. And looking between January and March, we took those 42 potential recommendations, had further discussion, and the task force was able to whittle that list down to solid 28 recommendations that are identified to move forward into the technical survey. And this is for review and input from community members. There will be additional discussions still with the task force to identify which ones continue to move forward and what are some additional caveats that might want to be included into those recommendations. So next, what I'd like to do is go through all of the draft recommendations. I won't spend a lot of time on any one. What I will be doing is taking a look at that major element topic, providing a little bit of detail behind it, and then walking through the recommendations that are coming forward. And as you can see on this first screen, a few things that I'll note. Each of these screens will come up. As it said, it'll have the element at the top. It'll have a description underneath of it in just layperson's terms, a little bit of what that topic means, and then the recommendation. And you'll see with this very first one, this one is numbered 1. There is a matrix on the Newtown Task Force that lists all 28 recommendations. Number 1 there will be number 1 here. Likewise, number 6 on that list will be number 6 on this list. As you go to that technical survey online, it's the same exact thing. Question number 1 will pertain to recommendation number 1. Question number 6 will pertain to recommendation number 6. So it's important to note that anytime we're looking at that number, we provided that consistency just for ease in reviewing the information. The other thing to note, and you see on the screen, is an asterisk at the end of the recommendation. While every recommendation will be reviewed again by the task force, there are certain ones that the task force wanted to come back and have additional discussion regarding. It means that there might not have been a complete consensus, or it might be something, and we'll see this later when we get into the redevelopment discussion about redevelopment of village centers, redevelopment of downtown Columbia, that everybody agrees that it should be a simplified process. But what that means, what the goals of that simplification are still for discussion. So those have asterisks as well. As I get to those recommendations, I'll mention a little bit of what that additional discussion is looking to be. So you have that information when you go and fill out that online technical survey as well. So to begin with, creating another new town district. We did get quite a few questions last night during our sessions as well. Right now, within section 125.0 of the zoning code, it talks about that Howard County can create another new town district as long as there is a large enough connected area of land that can function as a complete community. So that currently there is the availability that should there be enough land within Howard County, somebody could create another new town district. Now, the benefit of today is that I'll bring some of those questions that came up yesterday as well. Somebody had asked about, well, there is some farmland and being able to convert that, and that's a large parcel of land. That's something that could function as well. And there are already many elements within the current zoning code that can transition farmland to other development. So it's not necessarily looking at all of that. Currently as well, the original petitioner has the ability to maintain or restrict a new town district. And so that is something that was considered as a recommendation to move forward. So I'll pause on this one as well because we don't get to the original petitioner until a little bit later. So just a quick reference point. James Rouse developed all of Columbia as the original petitioner. And then it went to his company, and that company has since been purchased out and acquired by another company. So the role of original petitioner still exists, and it is held by a company at this time. And the function of the original petitioner is still to basically oversee that vision a bit. And while there are commercial plans, individuals wanting to develop under those commercial plans still need to go back to that original petitioner. So some of these I'll get into more in a moment. I just wanted to, there's a lot of terms on here. If you're not familiar, I wanted to make sure to familiarize you with them first. So moving on to the next set of recommendations, these have to do with the preliminary development plan, the comprehensive sketch plan, and the final development plan. This is a three-step development process identified within section 125, in which there is the overall development concept and how people need to go through this process for development. So there are a number of recommendations under this major topic, including maintaining the current overall structure, but seeking to simplify how approval and development is done within Newtown zoning district. And that word simplify, you're going to see come up many times. Much of what's being discussed as recommendations is how we go about simplifying a process to still hold that intention of Columbia, but make it perhaps not as cumbersome as it can be. The other is to standardize requirements by land use types across those final development plans. Currently, the final development plans includes all of the information for the various parcels, but there are land use types and within those final development plans, and perhaps looking at everything that a certain type of land use has certain standardized requirements. Another recommendation is to remove the comprehensive sketch plan as a step in the development process, effectively going from a three-step process to a two-step process. One other is consolidating those final development plans and their requirements to creating it as a table of permitted uses by area. So again, rather than going through the hundreds of FDPs, having a single table as a reference point. And looking at expanding the types of uses that can be approved administratively through Department of Planning and Zoning. So that is an option now of looking at Department of Planning and Zoning, and there's some things that can already be approved administratively, but how can we look at this and perhaps increase what can be approved in that manner? And finally, identifying the most effective opportunities for public engagement, making sure that public engagement is a priority through the process, But currently in this, and you'll hear it again later in the redevelopment process, there are many, many times of public engagement. Is that the best use of time for community members? And looking at how do we make that more streamlined and efficient while still securing community input throughout the process. The next major topic is defining credited open space, and Section 125 does have a definition for credited open space. And it's really anything that counts towards the district's required open space. So it is area that's not simply just green space, which is often what people think of with open space, but it can also be fields, recreational uses, other elements in that manner. So one of the recommendations is to better define open space in the Newtown zoning district to provide that greater clarity and potentially align with other county zoning of what is already defined as credited open space. Maintaining the current definition as it is within Section 125. And the one I will say that had unanimous approval and probably the least amount of discussion with multiple viewpoints is maintaining the required 30%, 36% of open space within Newtown zoning. So everybody has agreement that this is something very vital to Columbia and needs to be maintained. Also talking about ensuring permanent protection of currently established credited open space areas. And this one has an asterisk because it's really looking at it from an environmental stewardship perspective, probably really more about the green space side of it, not necessarily all of the open space. The next is apartments definition. Currently, Section 125 classifies apartments by building height and form and really include structures as long as they're not single family homes. So things that are attached, single family attached homes, such as townhomes, are included as an apartment. So one recommendation is to adjust the definition of apartments to align with the other county zoning definitions. Create a new land use category for single family attached housing types. And this gets really important when we talk about land use percentage requirements. Currently, apartments, townhomes, everything has a single percentage. It is not broken out separately. And then create a new land use category for diverse housing types, including missing middle housing types. So moving on to the next major topic of original petitioner. I mentioned already the definition of original petitioner, and the recommendations here is to remove the role of the original petitioner to amend commercial FDPs. With that, there is the additional recommendation, which is still looking for some more discussion about the county should review the potential for the planning board or another entity, not potentially a company, but another entity to take up the role of the original petitioner to have that overall oversight on what the plans and the vision are. Finally, moving into, well, not finally, but moving into the downtown and village center process simplification. I talked about this a lot already in the beginning as an example, so I'll go through this pretty quickly. But as we talked about, there was a 3-step process earlier. To do anything with the downtown and village center redevelopment, there is a 16-step review process and some very intense flow charts that are available online. You can certainly take a look at those. And as I mentioned before, and I'll pull all 3 up at once, the idea here was very much simplify that development process as well as reduce the number of public meetings required throughout that redevelopment process. Again, noting not to eliminate having engagement with the community, but reduce the number so that it's much more meaningful and efficient engagement with the community, as well as looking at what does it mean when we say simplify. The next major topic is density cap requirements. So currently in Section 125, there is a density cap requirement of 2.5 dwelling units per acre across the Newtown district. One recommendation is to maintain the density cap of 2.5 dwelling units per acre as it is. And the other is to consider excluding village centers from the Newtown-wide density cap, such that a village center can function as that hub of the village and look at mixed-use development, perhaps a little bit more density right in that area where there's some other stores, some ability to create some just some dynamic with the village center. Land use percentage requirements, similar to the density cap, the land use percentage requirements are per the different types of land use. And the recommendation is to evaluate and consider adjusting that land use percentage requirements. And I will note the outside of open space uses, that this recommendation is not touching that 36% open space, but just taking a look at the other land use types to really accommodate more diverse housing types. The next major topic is moderate income housing unit requirements. MIHU is moderately priced housing unit program, and it requires for certain residential developments to set aside a percentage of units as affordable housing. This is a requirement throughout Howard County. It is not within Section 125, so this is not a requirement within Section 125 of the Newtown zoning district. The recommendations under this area are to encourage diversity of housing types throughout the Newtown district. And this is similar to what we've seen as other recommendations throughout. To incentivize rather than require the provision of MIHU, so provide those incentives for developers. And to maintain the existing exemption from MIHUs in the Newtown district. The very last major topic of elements for recommendations is the expansion of uses, materials, and design guidance. And as you can see with that, what's written on the screen, much of this is written into the FDPs. Much of it is from the 60s and 70s. There have been updates throughout, but really looking at evaluating the expansion of the design advisory panel to review projects in Newtown, exploring the creation of pattern books to really incentivize the use of sustainable and resilient building materials. And a pattern book, if you're not familiar, is basically approved materials that are already identified for developers to take a look at that really meet, the modern and sustainable standards. And finally, taking a look at incentivizing and encouraging universal design and accessibility in Newtown. The example I like to use with this, because it's one that a lot of people can really relate to, think about in the 60s and 70s, people had decks, they were made of wood. Composite materials, recycled composite materials didn't exist at that time. They exist today. And so that's the type of thought process, especially with that recommendation number 27. So I'm going to come to a close here. You do have a QR code on the screen. I'm going to leave that up for a little bit. This is a technical survey. This is asking for individuals' inputs on those various recommendations. There are 28 recommendations. There are 28 questions, basically reciting those recommendations, whether you agree, disagree, or have no opinion, and opportunities to provide additional things that should be considered by the task force. We definitely want to get as many individuals replying to this technical survey. It will close on the 21st of April. And those survey results will be taken back to the task force, and they will be used to help inform the task force as they're finalizing the recommendations and developing the report. You can certainly learn more and stay tuned about the project process. The website is shown on the screen. You can also just Google Howard County Newtown Task Force. It comes up as the top link. And so I'm going to go back and we'll turn it over and open up for questions. I'll leave the QR code up here for a little bit longer just so that you can grab that. There is also a link on the website. Should you want to not take it on your phone, you can certainly take it on your computer as well. So with that, just to more easily see everyone, I will stop the video here. Stop sharing, not stop the video.
So again, we're opening it up for discussion. I did put in the chat. You can either put any questions you have in the chat, raise your hand. That's also an option. We can unmute you. It's a lot of material. Okay. Got a few raised hands.
Yes.
All right, I have Gerald.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My only question here is, and I'm interested in what you're doing. is my, in development, if we create more traffic, these roads were designed, back in the 60s, and the traffic system, I'm not sure was built to handle the population that we have now. Is there some consideration about traffic?
That question has come up several times, and that actually is not within the Newtown zoning code, but it
Ah.
is carried through other methods within the county. And I don't know, Linda, if you'd like to speak to it, because she just
Yeah.
completed a process about this as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And as Jennifer said, so the zoning does not account for the traffic. However, as development moves forward and a project comes in, traffic will be counted for at that time. So when a development occurs, the developer is responsible for a traffic study to see how that new community will affect the surrounding roads and level of service for those roadways, as well as there are adequate public facility ordinance standards that they must meet for roads. So to mitigate any issues that the development would cause for that roadway system, there's a duty to build the system that is needed for that particular development or create the mitigation efforts for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We had a few other hands raised. I think they were lowered. So just noting, I don't see any current hands raised. So are there any other questions? Do raise your hand or submit in the chat. Okay, we have another one. Richard Talkin. Richard, I'm trying to request you to unmute. Should have the option to do so. We can hear you.
One of the things I didn't see, and I understand the
Sorry, Richard, it's a little hard to hear you.
one of the things I did not see, do you hear me now?
A little bit.
Tiny.
It's tough. You're very low. I don't know if you're away from the microphone a bit or if you could speak up a little bit more.
I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Oh, that is much, much better.
Okay. I can't see you now, but one of the things I didn't hear, and my understanding is you're not considering is the relationship with the private covenants that control, particularly in town center, with the zoning regulations, the way, and I've seen for the first time your recommendations, but with those covenants in place the way they are, I don't think you'll be able to achieve your policy ideas and things like expanding uses, building use of building materials, universal design, all these kinds of things could be in conflict with the private covenants that are in place. So I don't see how the zoning regulations at this point in time when Columbia is essentially built out can ignore the relationship to those private covenants. There has to be a way to deal with them. I'll probably send in some recommendations on how to do that. But I think it's kind of, as far as town center, it may be less than useful to have these regulation reviews without considering those covenants. Now, I understand they're private covenants, but those covenants were related initially with respect to the zoning regulations. And those regulations over time have changed in certain respects with respect to town center. And so there has to be some kind of a consideration and dealing with the private covenants in some way. And I'll make some recommendations on that. But I think this whole plan doesn't really, may not really work, let's put it that way, as long as there is no consideration, possibly the relationship changing with respect to the covenants and the development. Thank you.
And always look forward to having people's recommendations and input in. Linda, I'll actually turn this over to you so that I know you had a conversation as well yesterday with an individual, just to make sure that we're getting the same message out to everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. So yes, I mean, private covenants has come up multiple times throughout this process. It is not part of the charge of 125 in the review. I understand what you're saying, but as you know, and as you spoke to, these are private contracts amongst the property owner and whoever would be developing on that property to adhere to the covenants with regard to the zoning framework. So looking forward to having your comments submitted so we can review those, but at this point in time, we're not going to be addressing the private covenants.
All right. Thank you for the question, comment. So I see a Jessamine Duval's hand raised.
Yeah, hi. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding one of the recommendations. It appeared that one of them indicated not to increase the density allowed in Newtown. What was it, like a certain number, 2.5 per acre or something like that?
Yeah.
But to consider the possibility of changing that at village center sites. So the village center site piece makes sense because that would be in line with HOCO by design. But in in the sense that we are, attempting to create ways for missing middle housing and the potential that there could at a future date be state legislation that allows for that kind of subdivision of a larger lot. It seems as though maintaining the density cap is sort of contrary to some of the other recommendations, because there was some talk about encouraging missing middle housing, and I don't see how that's possible without increasing that density cap. Is that something that has been considered, and what are your thoughts on that?
So this has been a big topic of conversation with the task force, going back and forth many times. Now, one of the things with excluding the village center, so currently it would have to be a defined area of how that village center is. And what's currently being already incorporated in the density cap would then be removed, and that would open up some space within that as well, based on how that is defined. So while it could exist while maintaining, saying maintain that existing density cap, once you exclude the village centers, you actually would find some additional space under that density cap.
Gotcha.
Yes.
That makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We have W. Burt. Go ahead and request your unmute. Should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm not sure, this is the first time I've joined any of the overviews, but I was just wondering, what are the reasons for deciding that a new town was needed within the Columbia-Howard County footprint? And then my second question is, will this presentation be sent out or added to the new town website? Thanks.
Absolutely. So to do your second question first, yes. Both this meeting right now is being recorded and is going live. So that is another manner to come back to this, to not only see the presentation, but to also hear the words that went with it, because it is a lot. I am aware. It's why I have a water next to me as well, just because it's a lot of information and a lot of talking to get through all of it. Now, as far as why was Columbia, I think you said, is why was Columbia decided as Newtown? It really was about the other way around. It really was that James Rouse came out and identified an area and developed a plan. And he developed that plan back in the 1960s. Both Toby Kester, who was online from JMT, as well as myself, I'm sure many of the others have also learned about James Rouse in our textbooks as we took our certification exams to be certified planners. This was something that was done that was very innovative at that time. And in fact, it's part of why it was not incorporated at that time as well, because in the 1960s and 1970s, zoning code really wasn't there to promote the same kind of inclusion that exists in what is now known as Columbia. And so really the Newtown zoning district came about after, or in part of developing, as James Rouse developed this plan and built it out. So it actually exists as after the fact. And Newtown, that concept of Newtown zoning, we see that, and in fact, we did a number of case studies as we went through this process as well. Greenbelt, Maryland is considered a new town as well. That concept of something that was developed as a very planned community. So we were able to take a look at the research, how did they develop? What have they done as next steps? What are their lessons learned? The good, the bad, the indifferent, what went well, what didn't went well, what do we want to see here? Let's learn from what others have been doing. Montgomery Village, Maryland was another one, and Reston, Virginia was another one that we used as case studies. So I hope that helps answer that question of it's really that James Rouse came first with a planned community, and then the zoning code really came around that as well.
So it's, so Newtown is a concept. It's not a new quote town.
Correct. It's just the name of section 125 in the zoning code. At the time, it was a new town, and that's why it was named in that manner. But now it is not that we are developing a brand new town. It is simply the name of section 125, just as the name of another section in the zoning code might be parking. It's just the name of the zoning code for that section.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
We currently don't have any other hands raised. Again, if you do have any questions, feel free to send it in the chat, raise your hand. Of course, if you want to, sit on it and send in an email, you can always email it questions to us as well. Happy to take those. And we will be giving another presentation again, the same presentation, here at 1 p.m. So you're welcome to. Yes.
It looks like W. Burt again has the hand raised.
Oh, you're right. Thank you.
That was just that was just the last part of my question. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to raise my hand again. I'm good.
That's okay. And you know what? You weren't the only one who had that comment. So if a suggestion is to change the name of the zoning district, definitely submit that, because we had some confusion, rightfully so. If I didn't know coming in, I would assume, hey, we're creating a new town in Howard County. So I appreciate that comment and the understandable confusion. So definitely, I think that's a comment we would want to hear. Is to change the name of the district to avoid future confusion. So appreciate that.
Okay.
Absolutely. And as Jeff noted, certainly time to think about comments, ask questions. I have shared again the QR code for the technical survey. And I will say, I mentioned earlier, this is a technical survey. It is talking about those recommendations, and simply if you agree or disagree, or even if you have no opinion, we still want to hear from everybody. There's plenty of opportunities to write information in as well. That is very important to get that feedback.
Just while we're waiting for others to still think of some questions here, and I'll just note, I did this presentation at one of the task force meetings, and it was about Newtown. So Newtown was a movement period within planning. So that name really kind of originates from that movement that occurred early in the 20th century. Started kind of out in England. There were towns just outside of London that were looking to starting a new town. But the concept was, much like how Columbia was developed out, was to have this central core with curvilinear road networks with other villages surrounding that core. And so since Columbia was developed with that framework, that model, it received that naming convention within our zoning code. So there's a little bit of a historical, you know, background to a lot of why it is named that as well. But it is quite confusing today when we talk about a town that is, you know, over 50 years old now. You know, how we want to name things, and it's always good conversation to have.
And as individuals are, as you're thinking about potential questions or just wondering if, you know, is this a good question to ask or not, feel free to ask questions even about the process, about the next steps. You know, we are happy to answer any of those. It does not necessarily have to be specific to a certain recommendation, even how some of those elements came about. We're happy to answer anything and everything to do with what this Newtown Task Force is putting together, how it's going, and what the next steps are out of this. I see Wendy's hand is up, Jeff.
You should be able to unmute.
Yes, thank you. I'm unmuted.
There we go.
Thank you for this presentation and that clarification about Newtown. That's helpful. I had a question about the MIHU piece that you discussed, incentivizing rather than requiring. And I don't know if you've gotten into that kind of detail, but I was curious about if there's discussion or ideas about how to incentivize.
So we have not gotten into that kind of detail at this time. It really was a lot more discussion of should MIHU be included within section 125? If it's not wanted as part of 125, because and Jeff was the one who was able to present quite a bit of this information to the task force. Throughout the Newtown zoning district, there is a diversity of housing today. You know, so maybe it might not be wanted as a requirement, but simply how could it be incentivized? And so the recommendation will still continue those conversations. There might be some ideas of how it could be, but that's going to also require that's one of those elements, as I mentioned early on, of the recommendation will go in. The next step after recommendations and the recommendation reports go in is for the county to review everything and then determine what else needs to be evaluated, because of course with every action there is the intended as well as unintended consequences, and just making sure that there's nothing that is harming or going against another piece of code or legislation elsewhere. So if there are ideas that you have of how that could possibly be incentivized, definitely encourage you to share those, whether now or certainly through the survey or providing an email comment as well.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I'll just note too, when you do take the survey, as you go through it, There's links that are provided throughout the survey to just allow you to jump right into conversations that took place amongst the task force members. So if you want to listen to a discussion, hear a little bit more about what was said and why this recommendation kind of came about, you're welcome to do so. I saw
I
Joel.
think it was
Horowitz.
Joel, yep.
Yep. Okay. Joel, you should be able to unmute now. All right, Joel, looks like you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Guess number of months ago, I shared with director and the staff the page from the called Downtown Columbia Development Memorandum of Understanding checklist that kept by the administration, where one of the things was the developers shall make a good faith effort to work over the next 6 to 12 months. This was a decade ago, I think now. With the county, the Columbia Association, the Columbia Village Association, the commercial property owners throughout Columbia to improve and modernize the real property covenant structures throughout Columbia. And then it said that the status says that ultimately the transfer did not occur to Columbia Association because the issue of the developer continued paying the third-party cost of these architectural reviews and enforcements, even though the developer no longer have the responsibility for the work. And that's apparently, according to that, that's why that broke down. So related to the previous question, the covenants, and as I've shared before, the executive order says to make recommendations on how to carry the new town's planned community framework, including but not limited to modifications to zoning regulations and development processes. And I think so many of us and the county itself and the council, when they approved the MOU letter, recognized the covenant issue. So to say that it's not part of the purview, I think is correct. And the fact that I think, as I just read, the third-party cost was part of the problem, that to have some semi-public nonprofit entity set up to deal with that and with the other authorities of the master developer issue should be the same entity. So I don't understand how you can ignore all that when they're tangentially related, and we need a mechanism to carry that forward, which everybody recognizes, in the fact that Howard Hughes signs off on their architectural things kind of without really getting into a lot of detail, unless they seem to care about certain things, which they did in Hickory Ridge redevelopment for reasons that are not clear. If they had an issue with Kimco somewhere else in the country, they apparently were having a fight over that. So to what extent have you discussed that, and why are you really hung up on this including but not limited to in the executive order review?
With the recommendations and the elements that have been discussed, we have certainly had quite a few conversations regarding the original petitioner role, how that role is impacted, and we do have a number of recommendations regarding the role of the original petitioner within the final development plans. We also have had conversations regarding the design advisory panel and how to increase that role, providing that across the board as well, and looking at what could be in addition to the design advisory panel. We have a recommendation that talks about increasing the administrative review and not necessarily needing to go through the total process, which would include some of that original petitioner involvement in the process of increasing the administrative approval allowances for the Department of Planning and Zoning. And we have also had conversations and have recommendations in here that do talk about Overall, looking at another entity outside of and eliminating that role of the original petitioner holistically from the FDPs and looking at and aligning with another entity, whether that is the planning board or another entity as well, that would be continued work effort above and beyond what these recommendations are. So there certainly are a number of elements, and there's been a lot of discussion with this task force and amongst the members of the task force of what does that look like, how can that come to fruition, and what are the things that can be completed at this time without getting into necessarily looking at private covenants that the county does not necessarily have the ability to weigh in on at this time. So I do want to point out that we do have, of the 20 recommendations, probably a good 6 to 7 of them very specifically get into some of the roles and responsibilities and reallocating those so that they are coming through whether it's a third party or through Department of Planning and Zoning or through another entity within the county. So I'll pause there. And I don't know if Linda or Kristen, if there were any additional elements, or Jeff, that you wanted to add into the conversation.
No, Jennifer, I think you covered it beautifully about all the conversations we've had around these topics. So I think there's nothing more to add. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Did you specifically deal with the MOU and the checklist specifically?
No, we did not.
Okay, well, I'm just going to note we've hit our 1 o'clock session time. So I think we should be moving on to the next presentation. So again, this will be a repeat presentation. Anybody here is welcome to stick around for it if you'd like to listen to it again. We do enjoy your feedback. And again, we have the survey out there, so please do take the survey. That's going to be the best way for you to provide your feedback on this process. So Jen, I think I'll turn it back over to you if you want to share your screen.
Absolutely. And I don't know at this time, Jeff, have we had any new individuals joining into?
I have seen a few here and there trickle in, so.
Great, wonderful. So for those who are sticking around from the first hour of this, this will be the same presentation. Definitely want you to stay on, listen. Sometimes it takes multiple times hearing things. I know, especially for as dense of a presentation as this is with information material. For those who are joining us now and hearing this presentation for the first time, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to learning more about what the Newtown Task Force has been doing within Columbia and providing feedback to this entire process. So we'll start again. For those who have had the chance to either join us back in October at our public meetings, come out to our task force meetings and kind of sit in the back and listen in to the task force discussions, some of this information will be very repetitive. But for those who are brand new to this process, I definitely do want to touch on some of our background information so that everybody's coming with that same kind of foundational knowledge of why this task force exists, how it came to be, what the background of Newtown is before we get into what the task force has been doing and the recommendations themselves. So the purpose of the task force, and this task force was developed really as a recommendation through HOCO by Design as that overarching document for the county. And you can see that it's the chapter that this came out of was to create this task force to really look at and evaluate and make recommendations on how to look at Newtown, Columbia, recognize the framework that it was built within as something very innovative, and recognize as well that that is now 60 some years old. So how do we make sure that we continue to move forward, maintaining that same ideas behind Columbia, but able to move it forward for the next 50, 60 years? As noted, there was an executive order for this. So the task force members were appointed, were recognized and submitted by county council members. And then through executive orders, they were appointed by the county executive. Now, when I say executive orders, it is because the first executive order appointed 20 members to the task force, and the second executive order added a 21st member to the task force. And the members of this task force are varied from the villages that they're representing, what they're doing in life, their demographics, their roles, their responsibilities within village board centers, within really everything coming together. And that really has led to some having a lot of great perspectives, representing multifaceted opinions to have some really good discussions. Now, there's a portion of the executive order that's blown up on the side, and that's really highlighting that the purpose of this task force is to evaluate and make recommendations, especially as it's pertaining to modifications to zoning regulations and development processes. And that's something really important, is that this task force is really identifying what are the recommendations to move forward. They're looking at what are the guide rails to put with those recommendations. They're not rewriting zoning code. They're providing recommendations saying these are the things that need to be updated, to be further evaluated, that this is what will help make sure that that vision of Newtown, Columbia will continue for the next 50, 60 years. And those will then be presented to, put into a final report and presented to the county. This overall project process really began last May, when we had an opportunity to sit down and meet with each of the task force members individually, have some conversations, and as well as talk to other stakeholders throughout Columbia of what is important about Columbia, what are the things that have you concerns for the future of Columbia, and to really get a good feel from that perspective of just what does life look like and what do you want life to look like. Because understanding that larger perspective will help guide the direction of everything that follows. From that time, and what you can see on the screen in front of you is each of the dots represent a month, and every dot that is colored in represents a meeting that has happened with the task force. So with the exception of last May and then 1 month off in August, this task force has been meeting on a monthly basis to do a lot of work, have a lot of great discussions, have a lot of really looking at everything holistically, receiving that information, and then being able to do some of that analysis. We'll talk about here momentarily. We started with an envisioning process that went into something called a PSET analysis, and I'll explain that again in a moment. And really getting through recommendations to where we are now in April of going out to the public and providing information to the community at large. We had a session last night that was an in-person public meeting with the same presentation given twice yesterday as well. And then now we're having this virtual session. Out of this, what we're really hoping to get are a lot of comments, a lot of individuals to fill out the technical survey. We'll have that closed and provide that feedback to the town, to the task force at our next meeting at the end of April to really be able to finalize the recommendations and move forward into that draft report presentation. So a little bit of the background, just bringing that background information to everybody. We are talking about the Newtown Zoning District Code 125, and looking at Newtown Zoning District is that classification for Columbia as an unincorporated town. Was created in 1965, initially with over 13,690 acres of land, with now an additional 14,272 acres included. And unlike some of the traditional zoning that occurs throughout Howard County and we see in many other areas, Newtown zoning includes those plans that are really regulating land use mixes at that neighborhood level. And I'll talk momentarily, you'll see a slide with James Rouse on here that really gets into the innovation and being ahead of its time when this was being developed. Before we get into that information, I do just want to note when we talk about Newtown and Columbia, we're often using those terms interchangeably. However, Columbia, you can see on this map, is everything that's within that orange boundary outline. What is considered Newtown is in that darker gray. So while the Newtown area is predominantly within, almost completely within Columbia, all of Columbia is not Newtown zoned. And so that's something to just recognize. So when you look at that orange boundary outline and you see some of these areas, and I'm not sure if you can see the arrow or not, but some of these areas that are that much lighter gray, that is area within Columbia. It still falls within Columbia, but it's not Newtown. And so some of they're considered out parcels, and those are zoned the other Howard County zoning, such as M2, B1, R20, etc., for how they're set up. This is simply another map to identify just the boundary map of Newtown, Columbia, with the various villages within it as well, and some of the points of interest. Now, as I mentioned, James Rouse is the one who really had this vision and this idea. If you were able to listen in just not too long before I started this presentation, Jeff gave a great background on the history of Newtown as a concept. You know, it is a concept that came really across the ocean from England. And it was this concept, and James Rouse had this vision of creating an area of land, had a full planned community, and really recognizing of bringing all people together, regardless of race, income, just bringing everybody together, which at that time in the 60s and 70s, zoning was really not set up that allowed that, which is also part of that concept of being unincorporated, to really allow something that was truly innovative at the time. But he really did establish the 4 goals for Columbia. He wanted to build a complete city, a place where people can live, work, and play truly within a city. He wanted to make sure that to respect the land, and that is very much reflected in a lot of the green space and open space, and we'll talk about the difference between those shortly here as well. He wanted to provide for the growth of people, so that opportunity for different people to meet and greet and get to understand and know each other. And of course, as a business person, he wanted to make a profit off of this. But Columbia definitely was innovative. It was ahead of its time. These are what it was built on. And these are in fact, these very elements as we talk through this of what this task force has been tasked with, of identifying where within the zoning code can we make sure that as the world around us has changed, what needs to be updated to ensure that those same principles continue for the next 50 to 60 years. So the task force began with the June and July meetings and really looking at some vision statements. Now, this was not to set a new vision for the city, for Columbia. It's not to set a new vision statement for Howard County, for any of the village town centers. This visioning exercise was for the task force members to identify and understand what was most important for Columbia as it is and Columbia for the future. The intention of these vision statements is that every recommendation will come back and really be put back up against these statements to be used as more or less that litmus paper test. Do these recommendations meet what the vision is? And to make sure that from the beginning of this process through the end, we've always maintained that clarity of what those next steps are. The next component and the next set of meetings had to do with the PSET analysis, as I mentioned earlier, and the PSET principles, standing for preserve, strengthen, enhance, and transform. And what that really stood for is, as the task force was analyzing the different elements, it was really evaluating, do we preserve this? Does this work today? Is this very important? Do we keep it as it is? Maybe it's something that works well today, but it needs to be strengthened a little bit further, and we need to identify ways to strengthen what that code is, what that process is. Maybe it needs to just really be enhanced, because as time has gone on, there's additional things to think about, or there's ways that this isn't working in the same way as it was fully intended to. It still works, but it just needs to be enhanced further. And finally, is it something that really just needs to transform? That what was originally put in just simply isn't valid any longer for the world in which we have around us today. So using those PSET principles, we identified a number of elements for discussion. And the task force spent many meetings having discussions about each of the elements that you see on your screen. Now, these elements really came from a number of locations. One, through Department of Planning and Zoning, as they've heard different feedback regarding Newtown zoning. It came from conversations from task force members as well. It also really came from other studies that occurred prior to this task force and some of those recommendations. One of the other things this does is rather than going through the zoning code section by section, this really thematically brings that zoning code together to the major topics as well. From the vision and then the PSET discussions, which happened over a number of months, there were draft recommendations developed. And that process really looked like this, of having what are all of those potential recommendations. They came from the task force PSET discussions. And as individuals, both the county, the consultant working together as a team, as individuals were saying, like, what about we try this? What about we try that? Every single one of those what abouts we were documenting, so that even if they just simply were a flash in time of a statement or a potential recommendation, we were bringing that back to make sure that everything was vetted and we had done the due diligence as well. Recommendations also came out of the October 2025 public meetings and the comment cards that were filled out at that time of anything that was a potential recommendation. Likewise, last fall, there was also an online survey that was completed, or that was put out there October through November, and looking at all of the results that came from that online survey. Out of these various methods, there were a total of 42 potential recommendations that were identified for discussion. And those discussions really started with the January through March meetings, where the task force was looking at all of the various information and then identifying with those recommendations what really should be moving forward. From those discussions, 28 of those 42 recommendations have been identified to move forward to this meeting for public information, for public comment, as well as for additional discussion, which will happen at the next task force meeting. So what I'm going to do is go through those major elements and those 28 recommendations. I'll go through it fairly quickly, and we can certainly come back and ask questions later. With this first slide, I do want to note in this first topic, I want to note a few things about these recommendations. So each of the slides, I'll go through what that major topic is and that major element is at the top of it. And you'll see that as in here, creating another Newtown district. There is an area on here that's in a gray box. That's just going to be really a brief understanding of what that topic is as a whole. And then we'll have the various recommendations. This one shows recommendation number 1. Just want to note that there's a matrix on Howard County's Newtown Task Force website that shows all 28 recommendations in a row. Number 1 shown in here will be number 1 there. Likewise, number 6, the 6th recommendation will be the 6th recommendation on that matrix. And when you do go to take that technical survey, the question number 1 revolves around recommendation number 1. Likewise, question number 6 revolves around recommendation number 6. We maintain that number consistency to try to keep it in a complex topic, to try to keep it as simple as possible and consistent as possible. Finally, the other thing I'll note on here, you'll see that asterisk at the end of the recommendation. And while the task force will be reviewing all of the recommendations again, those that have the asterisk are those that perhaps need some additional conversation from the task force, perhaps looking at those additional elements or the additional guide rails to be put into that recommendation. Probably the easiest example to explain that with is we'll get to the ones that talk about the redevelopment process for the village centers and downtown Columbia, and really looking at simplifying and the recommendations there to simplify what that process looks like. Well, everybody agrees that yes, it should be simplified. However, what does simplification mean? What is the goal of simplifying it? And that's where those asterisks are, because there's still additional discussion to be had. So coming back to this very first topic of creating another Newtown district, There is within section 125 that Howard County can create another Newtown district as long as there is a large contiguous connected area of land that is designed to function as a complete community. The recommendation from the task force is maintaining the original petitioner's ability to maintain or restrict a Newtown district. Now, before I move on, there's really a lot that's in this first recommendation. I do want to note as well the term original petitioner. For those of you who might not be aware, that is this very specific term. The original petitioner originally was James Rouse. He developed Columbia. He was the original person to petition to have this land and this plan developed. Then it went to his company and it has since gone on to another company. So there is a corporate entity that is the original petitioner at this time. There are other recommendations that can impact this one later as we come back to it, but it is still, as noted here, maintain the original petitioner's ability to maintain or restrict a Newtown district. So moving into the next element, and I won't have that much discussion about each one. There's a lot of background information to make sure as we move through these that we're understanding with the numbering, the asterisks, and everything else. But the next major topic is the preliminary development plan, the comprehensive sketch plan, and the final development plan. And within section 125, there is a 3-step development process that needs to be followed in order for that development, which also includes public engagement throughout the process. There are a number of recommendations that the task force put forward, including maintain the current overall structure, but seek to simplify the approval and the development process. And that terminology of simplify is something that we're going to see over and over again throughout the various recognitions, throughout the various recommendations. Then standardized requirements by land use types across the FDPs. So how the final development plans, they have different land use types shown and requirements on each of those FDPs, and really noting that the rather than going through over 200 FDPs, that having a land use type having that requirement standardized. Removing the comprehensive sketch plans in the development process. So taking what is a 3-step process to a 2-step process. Consolidating all of the FDPs and the requirements and create that table of permitted uses by area. So very similar to before of standardizing the requirements, also making it a document that makes it a little bit easier to find all of this information, again, simplifying. Expanding the types of uses that can be approved administratively through the Department of Planning and Zoning. So that is certainly something that DPZ has the ability to approve certain things administratively through this process, but expanding what that looks like. And then finally, identifying the most effective opportunities for public engagement, and really recognizing that public engagement and hearing from the community is so important, but looking at how many times of going out to the community, one, just from community members needing to be at the number of meetings, but also making sure that it is effective and at the appropriate times for community members to be providing that feedback. The next major topic is defining credited open space. So section 125 does have a definition of credited open space. It is more than just green space, and that's been a conversation throughout, that green space is part of open space, but open space is above and beyond green space, and it is something that counts towards the district's overall required open space, but it also can be things such as recreational fields and other uses, as long as they are still considered open space uses. The recommendations for this topic is to define open space in the Newtown zoning district, just providing a greater clarity of what that means, and also looking at aligning with the county zoning district definitions. Maintain the current definition as it is. And the one topic that really had probably the least amount of discussion and the most unanimous support is maintain the required 36% of open space within the Newtown zoning district. And finally, ensuring permanent protection of currently established credited open space areas. And the reason this one is an asterisk is thinking about the permanent protection from the perspective of environmental stewardship, not necessarily the recreational areas, but identifying where that green space is, which is counted as open space, and looking at it, should there be a permanent protection of that green space? The next major topic is the definition of apartments. So currently section 125 does classify apartments by the building height, the form, and it does include structures that are not single family homes into that classification, such as townhomes. Because a townhouse is a single family attached structure, that is defined as an apartment and has all of the requirements of the apartment land use percentages. So the recommendations are to adjust the definition of apartments to align with other county zoning district definitions, to create a new land use category for single family attached housing types, so that apartments and townhomes could be in two separate categories, thereby looking at different land use percentages as well, and creating a new land use category for diverse housing types, which really is looking at including a missing middle housing type as well. The next major topic is the original petitioner. So I spoke to this at the very beginning of what that original petitioner is and who that is currently, but really the role of that original petitioner. So it's not just the landowner or the long-term leaseholder. It is also the role of that original petitioner is also looking at the overall plan, how things are fitting in within the context of everything. The recommendations out of this is to remove the role of the original petitioner to amend commercial FDPs, as well as for the county to review whether it should be the planning board that continues that role for the original petitioner or another entity that should be taken into effect for that role. I've already mentioned as well quite a bit about our next major topic of downtown and village center process simplification. For individuals to be aware, there is a 16-step process for the redevelopment of village centers and downtown Columbia, and really taking and public engagement through each of those steps. There's a flow chart on Howard County's website that you can go and see the complexities of those 16 steps. And taking a look through, you'll see that these are all very similar in nature of simplify what that development process looks like, both for the village center as well as downtown Columbia. And through that simplification, reduce the overall number of public meetings, not to exclude input whatsoever, but again, just to make sure that it is effective and efficient community input at stages where it is most appropriate to be. There is a density cap requirement within section 125 of the zoning, and it says that there should be an overall cap of 2.5 dwelling units per acre. The recommendations out of the task force are to maintain the density cap as it is, as well as consider excluding village centers from that new town-wide density cap. So the village centers as the hubs of the village, consideration for mixed use development in those areas, and then thereby excluding that from that density cap. Similarly, with land use percentage requirements, Section 125 does have land use percentage requirements, and the recommendations are to evaluate and consider adjusting those land use percentages outside of that open space requirement. So going back to that earlier recommendation, maintaining 36% for that land use requirement of open space. But part of this is also to accommodate more diverse housing types. With that, I'll move into the moderate income housing unit requirements. So the MIHU is a requirement across Howard County that for certain residential developments to set aside a percentage of units as affordable housing. This requirement, it does not exist within section 125, the Newtown district. And the recommendations, as we discussed these, were simply encourage diversity of housing types throughout the Newtown district, to incentivize rather than require, but provide incentives for developers excuse me, to account for the provision of MIHUs as they're developing it within section 125, and then also maintain that existing exemption from MIHUs in the Newtown district. The final major topic is the expansion of uses, materials, and design guidance. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, all of this was created in the 1960s and 1970s. And while there have been updates throughout, some of that design guidance was based on those FDPs. So the consideration to evaluate the expansion of the design advisory panel role to be able to review projects in Newtown, to look at exploring the creation of pattern books, which will help incentivize modern sustainable materials. If you're not familiar with what a pattern book is, it is something that has pre-approved materials in it that developers can take a look at and use without having to go through the entire approval process, and can really incentivize and take a look at what some of these newer sustainable materials are. And lastly, incentivize and encourage universal design and accessibility in Newtown zoning. One of the examples I like to use regarding expansion of uses and materials and design guidance is just really think about that while there have been updates in some of these elements, think about what existed in the 1960s and 1970s. If you wanted to put a deck on your house, you most likely were using just wood for a deck, because things such as recycled composite material didn't exist at that time. So materials have changed. They have become more sustainable. And that's just one example to think about when we talk about design guidance and uses and materials. So with that, it comes to this final slide here. Really, we want to hear from everybody. Going to open it up for questions and discussion points. Want to hear from everybody today through this format. Encourage you to share the video link with others and the information with others about this. And we really want people to take that technical survey. It is a technical survey. It is 28 questions, one for every recommendation to ask whether you agree or disagree. Excuse me, or have no opinion, and then also to provide additional information. These results will be shared, so the survey is open until April 21st, and then we're going to do an output of the survey so that we can share that information with the task force to help in the April meeting for their continued discussion of wrapping up those recommendations to move it forward into that report. We encourage everyone to continue to stay informed about the project process. The link is shown on your screen. You can also always just Google Howard County Newtown Task Force, and it comes up as the very first link to hit online as well. So with that, we'll end the presentation. I will go back to this QR code so you can have that on your screen a little bit longer, perhaps save that to your phone. You can review that later as we open up for questions.
All right. Thanks, Jen. And as mentioned, we are going to be allowing folks to either raise their hand or submit comments in the chat box. So please, either option is open for discussion.
And we will note, we know this is a lot of information to go through. So certainly take your time thinking about questions. You can ask, we encourage questions, whether it's regarding a specific recommendation, next steps in the process, or anything else that you would like to ask to relevant to the Newtown Task Force and Section 125 of the Zoning Code.
And even if you don't have a question, you just have a comment, just want to explain why you're here, what brought you here today, we'd love to hear from you as well. I happen to have grown up in Columbia, by the way. So I was born born here in Columbia, loved Columbia growing up here. It was such a diverse, welcoming community. Really fortunate to have been raised here, and it's really quite something to be working for the county and planning for the community that you grew up in. So I definitely have an appreciation for it and would love to hear from others about what they appreciate too.
Hey, Jennifer, thank you for a great presentation, and Jeff for all that information. I'm not sure how many people are new. I see 7 attendees. I think some of the attendees seem like the same people that were here for the first time, so I'm not sure if we're gonna have many questions.
Yeah, I think the ones that did come in a little later also just kind of dropped out. So I think we're kind of at the same point where we were now when we first started giving the second presentation. So yeah, I guess what we can just do is remind folks that they're welcome to send in any questions after the fact. We do have a Department of Planning email, planning@howardcountymd.gov, that you can submit questions, comments to, and of course the survey. So that survey is out. We definitely want people to take it. Looking here, I think the survey ends on April 21st, so please try to get it done by then. Any comments would be very helpful for especially the next task force meeting, which will take place April 28th. So, but thanks everybody for coming today, for your comments and questions. Any other things that we want to mention, Jen? Did I capture everything?
Absolutely. Oh, I see Joel has raised his hand and lowered, so I'm not sure.
I'll go ahead and request unmute. Joel, did you have anything to say?
Yes, I guess when you were asking the members one of their meetings what they wanted in 50 years, and pointed out, did we really want to still be amending something called the preliminary development plan by putting the things in the corner of the black and white version that's basically impossible to read? So last hour you discussed changing the name of Newtown, which I'm not sure is important as should in 100 years we still be having a preliminary development plan, and all that process is going to the zoning board? Because it seemed to me that was supposed to be the broad sketch. You called it the preliminary development plan. That's why you have final development plans for the different neighborhood level. So how do we get beyond that whole stuff that's going on with the Long Reach redevelopment to mend the PDP? Has that been discussed?
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, yeah, I was just trying to reflect the Long Reach process is still ongoing. This is a separate process as of today.
Correct.
So we're looking at
Do a generic question.
Right.
So as a generic question of just and understanding that, the when you look at a preliminary development plan, it was that large overarching master plan that James Rouse had put out there, and then the next steps of each individual kind of infill coming through. We've had a lot of conversations about that process. In fact, we have the most recommendations under that topic. And one of the things that I had shared earlier, I'm not sure at which point I shared and which point you were able to join in. We did a number of case studies looking at some other Newtown areas in Reston, Virginia, Montgomery Village, Maryland, Greenbelt, Maryland, and really took a look at what is their process. And many of them have gone to a 2-step process. So there is still a process there. Looking at this as a whole, whether it's called preliminary development plan or some other name, as you noted, maybe it's the name that could be considered as changing. There is still a process there as different land is available and being developed again or redeveloped through that land that might be outside of the village center and downtown. But there has been a lot of conversation about what that is. Should it be that two-step process instead, kind of recognizing that everything was built out once, and now it's more of a redevelopment than a development. So there has been discussion about that.
And I guess related to that, the zoning board cases earlier had a whole discussion of whether they had authority to redevelop, because with the county commissioners basically approved the PDP and they decided they had inherent authority because otherwise they'd be stuck. So is there a discussion of formalizing the redevelopment rules rather than having the zoning board having them fill in the gaps?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question completely. And maybe Linda might be
So
something you're
Joel, I
more
think the
familiar.
question, what I'm understanding, you're trying to get the gist of, are we talking about changing the major and minor center redevelopment process and how they have to go to zoning board for the
No,
approval of
bigger
that
than that,
process?
that I try to remember if it was which zoning board case it was, where the zoning board, because it was cited, I think 1004 or something, where they had to deal with redeveloping and whether they had any authority to redevelop. And that's been relied upon in the couple of decades since, and whether that should be put into the code or the regs for how to go about dealing with the redevelopment and the infill, rather than having the zoning board was having to.
So not to that level of detail, and those questions can come up when this is referred to during compre zoning, and this will go to council. So those more detailed discussions will happen at that point in time.
All right, but that part of the redevelopment, it's complicated because it's been made up by the zoning board DNOs. And there's no written rules on a lot of it, how to actually do the redevelopment.
Well, thank you for that information.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Well, just in case there are any other brewing questions here, I will again just share the QR code as I've done before, just really wanting people to take that technical survey. Make sure you take it before April 21st. Share it with individuals that will be able to take that as well. As I noted, it is 28 questions, one for each of the recommendations. And Jeff, I'll leave it to you if we have the same attendees as before and no other questions in the next minute or so, perhaps we are able to conclude this session.
I think that's the right way to go about it. I do continue just monitoring here. See, it looks like we still have just the last few folks. But yeah, I think we're about there. I do appreciate everybody attending today, being able to come, give your comments, thoughts. Again, we have the survey. Please take the survey. It'll be really helpful as we continue to develop these recommendations. So thank you everybody for coming today. Appreciate it. And we hope to see you here soon, especially when we put out the final report. So
Thank you all for your attendance this afternoon and your questions. We really appreciate and look forward to hearing from you in the survey.
all right.
Okay.
With that, I'll go ahead and end it. Thanks, everyone.